Aric Almirola could be potentially retiring at the end of this year, and there's a lot of blatant race manipulation that happens during the Cup Series race at Martinsville. What's going on, guys? It's Daniel, and welcome back to our video. We got some NASCAR and other motorsports stories Custer today on the channel. Let's go ahead and just show them trailers really quickly. We've only got one paint scheme to take a look at, and it's Noah Gragson's 2024 Nitro Circus scheme that we'll see this weekend at Phoenix. This scheme is absolutely incredible. One of the best SHR schemes we've seen so far this year. It's really awesome to see they got a new partnership with Nitro Circus. It looks absolutely amazing, looks phenomenal, and I'm definitely looking forward to it on the racetrack this weekend at Phoenix Raceway. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Raising Cane's. As it was reported on Friday by Adam Stern that Raising Cane's has been named the official finger chicken brand at Phoenix Raceway. There's going to be some sort of key or SR code that's going to be out there for you to use, and I think it will be able to get some sort of sweepstakes to get more chicken if I'm not mistaken. Raising Cane's is one of the biggest chicken brand companies out there, really big in the fast food chain. Their sauce is also really good in my opinion. I think it's a pretty good partnership. We've seen Raising Cane's grow across this country, and it's pretty exciting to see that Raising Cane's is continuing to grow their presence in the sport. I think it's really awesome overall. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Christian Eckes. We'll get to the other Christian Eckes story here in a little bit, but it was reported by Joseph Strigley yesterday or a couple days ago that Christian Eckes has led 1,000 laps in the Craftsman Truck Series in 2024. He is only the 5th driver in Truck Series history to lead 1,000 laps and is the first driver to lead 1,000 laps in a season since Kyle Busch all the way back to 2010. The other 3 drivers are, I believe, Mike Skinner, Ron Hornaday Jr., and I believe Jack Sprague, if I'm not mistaken. 3 of the best drivers in Truck Series history. Christian Eckes has been super consistent throughout 2024 and will be looking to win a championship this upcoming week at Phoenix, which I think he's got a really great chance and a really strong opportunity. I think it'll be a major factor to get it done, definitely, and it's good to see him lead over 1,000 laps so far in 2024. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about IndyCar. As there was reported by Adam Stern on Friday that the Taylor Swift announcement generated more engagement than all the racetrack Indianapolis' social media throughout 2024, including the fact that they announced that they would basically be in a rain delay for the Indianapolis 500 when it got delayed partially through. That they have a big partnership with Taylor Swift that's coming around with her brands, if I'm not mistaken, which I think is really, really huge for IndyCar. It's actually showing that IndyCar might be able to find a way to try to market themselves and grow themselves quite a bit. Because one of the biggest issues that IndyCar has had for a while is the fact that they have not been able to promote and grow their sport overall, which has hurt them in the long run. So the fact they've been able to do this and get this partnership going, I think is really, really huge for the brand. And I think it's pretty exciting to see that they're going to continue to grow. Maybe we'll see Taylor Swift out the track. I think that'd be pretty awesome if that ended up happening. But she'll probably be at a football game at some point or do something else off the track at that point. And I really would love to see her at the Indy 500. We'll have to see if it does end up happening, but we'll see if it does end up coming true, if she can be at the racetrack. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the Salpo Grand Prix. Before the NASCAR Cup Series race in Martinsville took place, you had the Salpo Grand Prix, and this race was absolutely wild. From the get-go, they moved the start of the race up a little bit earlier because there was a bunch of rain in the area, and they actually had qualifying early in the day, and Alex Albon didn't even get to start the race. As they were doing the pace laps, Lance Stroll ended up crashing. He fell out of the race. And then Lando Norris decided to go a little bit up and did, for some reason, I don't think he got a penalty for that after the race concluded, but basically went while Max Verstappen actually followed the procedure and was able to stay in his position. And then there was a lot of chaos, multiple red flags, multiple big crashes that took place. Franco Calipino fell out of the race, and Lando Norris made a ton of mistakes. But the best car all day was Max Verstappen. He emerged as the guy to be throughout the whole entire event and got the lead with around 25 laps to go over Esteban Ocon. And once he got the lead, he pulled out to a near 20-second lead by the end of the event. And coming off the final quarter, Max Verstappen would maximize the points, get 26 points, and pick up, I believe, his 9th or 10th win of 2024 and pull out 18 more points on Lando Norris and win the Sao Paulo GP. Max Verstappen put up a dominating clinic. The best car all day, a dominant run, very much a really great call in the intermediates especially. They played some strategy during some of the safety cars to get up there too, but that number 33 or 1 car was super, super excellent. Congratulations to Max Verstappen on winning the Sao Paulo Grand Prix, an absolute dominant win for Max Verstappen in Sao Paulo. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Days of Thunder. As there was a report by Adam Stern on Friday that Tom Cruise is eyeing a Days of Thunder sequel that will take place on Paramount. I was not able to look at the article to see exactly what they're planning to do with the Days of Thunder sequel, but if you've watched the original Days of Thunder, which came out 34 years ago, this is absolutely huge. Now, I'm not exactly sure when the Days of Thunder sequel is going to come out. My best guess is 2026 or 2027. But at that point, Tom Cruise, I believe, is going to be 65 or 66 years old at that point, or 65 or something like that. So he is definitely going to be a lot older. That being said, I've been wanting to see a Days of Thunder sequel for a long time because Days of Thunder was one of those movies. It was kind of like a cult film for NASCAR, if you will, but it was a very excellent and really great movie. And I think it'd be pretty awesome to see the sequel come out on Paramount. I'm kind of hoping it's based on Mark Martin's 2009 season when Mark Martin was a lot older, around 50 years old in 2009, and had a career resurgence and nearly beat Jimmy Johnson in the championship that year and only losing by about 100 points over Jimmy Johnson. I think that's how they should base the Days of Thunder sequel. I really think that's how it should be, and I really hope that's the case for it, so I think it's awesome to see it looks like they're making it, and I'm really excited to see that it looks like they're making a Days of Thunder sequel, in my honest opinion. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Lane Riggs. As there was reported by Steven Taranto from CBS that Lane Riggs is having off-season shoulder surgery to fix the dislocated shoulder that he had. If you watch the Craftsman Truck Series race in Milwaukee back in early September or late August, Lane Riggs had picked up his first career NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series win at the Milwaukee Mile. After the race had concluded, he had dislocated his shoulder getting out of the truck. Now, luckily, his team is able to repair that from Front Row Motorsports, and he was able to celebrate it, but he did say his arm was hurting. Now, apparently, a NASCAR physician that works with a lot of these drivers, who's done some of the surgery with Denny Hamlin as well, he's apparently going to be the one that is working with Lane Riggs. This is really good to see that they're looking to get this figured out and fixed because Lane Riggs can't have this all the time. Apparently, this has been an injury he's had for a very, very long time. He talked about it a couple months ago after he won his first race, which then again he won at Bristol, not too much after that. But I think Lane Riggs getting it figured out is a really good thing, and hopefully he can get this figured out and sorted out. It is also not expected to impede him going into 2025, so I think that's also really good to see that it's not going to affect him because Lane Riggs is going to be someone that you're going to have to watch out for in 2025. He's been super strong near the second half of the season in the Craftsman Truck Series, and I think he's got a really strong chance and opportunity to put up a run at Corey Heim, who's most likely going to be returning to the Truck Series next year as well. There's an outside chance he can go to Legacy. But I think Lane Riggs getting this figured out is a great thing to see, and I hope he can recover from it really quickly once the shoulder surgery happens. I expect it to most likely happen early in the offseason once we get done with the Truck Series season next weekend. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Warner Bros. And Amazon. As it was reported by Adam Stern on Friday afternoon that Warner Bros. And Amazon joined NASCAR because they saw NASCAR was willing to make important changes, circa the NASCAR Chicago street race they added in 2023 and also in 2024. Say what you want to say about NASCAR, I think this is definitely a little bit of a positive for them that they're bringing in Warner Bros. And Amazon. I think that they're going to be able to bring a lot of engagement to the sport and grow the sport in a big way. And one big part of that is bringing Dale Jr. into the broadcast booth for 2025. Dale Jr. was an excellent part of NBC for the last 5 or 6 years. Unfortunately, was not part of NBC for 2024 because his contract ended after 2023 and was not able to renegotiate for 2024. But I think that NASCAR does have to get with the times in some sort of capacity. You can't just keep doing the same thing over and over again in some ways. You have to change things up to grow the sport. I think that's one thing NASCAR has done good is the schedule. I think the schedule has been a big positive for the sport, and I think it's been a really good direction for the sport, making some schedule changes. They're going to Mexico City next year, which I'm really excited about that race, and I think going back to Chicago in 2025 is really huge, and there's a really great chance and possibility that we likely will be headed to San Diego in 2026 potentially as NASCAR is working to get that done. To me, I think that they continue to make important changes to hopefully grow the sport, and that's what we want to see, right, is NASCAR grow. But they also need to get that casual fan, which they've not been able to really attract that. There's a lot of reasons for that, unfortunately, and I do think that there's a lot of things that they can do to try to fix in certain areas, but I do think they're looking to grow the sport, and hopefully they can do that going forward into the not-so-distant future. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Hinger Racing. As it was reported by Colby Evans from Aric Almirola, he reported something that Jamie Little said on the Truck Series broadcast. She reports that Hinger Racing is expected to go full-time in the Truck Series in 2025. Now, Hinger Racing made their Truck Series debut this past weekend, and Martinsville actually had a really good run going, and they were running up inside the top 20 near the end of the event with Brett Moffitt before unfortunately ended up crashing out after Dean Thompson and Tanner Gray got into it, who were teammates, by the way, which we'll get to here in just a short little bit. Now, Hinger Racing, for those who don't know, is owned by Chris Hinger, who is the father of Katie Hinger, who also she is a fellow racer who's raced in the Cars Late Model Tour, and I think also has made some ARCA West starts, if I'm also not mistaken at this point. Now, Brett Moffitt is a driver. If they're looking to go full-time in 25, they probably will get in alliance with Spire Motorsports going into next year. And if I was Hinger Racing, I would stick with Brett Moffitt. Brett Moffitt is a driver who really can build your program up. Look what he did with AM Racing last year. He got them 8 top 10s and a top 5 and had an outside chance of making the playoffs in the middle portion of the year. After he left that team, they've struggled. Haley Deegan did not run well with the organization, and outside of Joey Logano getting a couple top 10s, they've only had a few top 20s, and they generally have really struggled since Brett Moffitt left. I think if I'm Hinger Racing and if I want to build my program up, Brett Moffitt is the guy to go with. If not, maybe Daniel Hemrick, but Daniel Hemrick is heavily linked to McAnally Hilgeman going into 2025, so I don't think Daniel Hemrick will be available. But Hinger Racing needs to build up their program, and I think bringing in Brett Moffitt has been a major asset. I think they're going to be better at Phoenix. I think they're going to be more prepared at Phoenix, and I think they're going to run a lot better as well. So to me, I'm glad to see that this team is looking to go full-time next year. I think it's going to be huge for the organization, and they're going to have good owners' points as well. If they can run really good the rest of the year, I think it'll be really huge for the team. So we'll see what ends up happening in regards to that, see if they can run really well, but I really hope for Hinger Racing's sake they could bring Brett Moffitt in full-time, so I do believe he can build the program up and make it a lot stronger going into next year for 2025. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Parker Retzlaff and Sam Mayer. Now, if you watched the NASCAR Xfinity Series race, you saw the conflict between Parker Retzlaff and Sam Mayer. Going into, I believe, the second restart on lap 40 or 45, you had Chandler Smith on the inside and Parker Retzlaff on the outside, or Cole Custer, on the inside. And Cole Custer got a really strong restart going into turn number 1. But Sam Mayer might have been getting pushed by Josh Williams. I'm not entirely sure. And Sam Mayer just drove into the back of Parker Retzlaff and just spun him and crashed him hard into the outside wall. Now, to be fair to Parker, he did not have the best restart there, but really, in my opinion, what Sam Mayer and Josh Williams did, I'm going to put some blame on Josh Williams for the incident as well. I think that what they did was completely unacceptable. I get that you're upset and frustrated that Parker did not get the best restart, but there is no way, in my opinion, that you deserve to run into the back of somebody. Some of the etiquette during this weekend was not very good, and Sam Mayer got involved in multiple other incidents throughout the race. He caused, I think, another incident near the middle portion. Then he kind of got karma because he took himself out of contention to make the next round of the playoffs. And then the tweet he put out saying he had a fast car. And what's so unfortunate for Parker Retzlaff too in this situation is the fact that Parker Retzlaff does not have a ride right now for 2025. It's very unlikely he'll be back with Jordan Anderson Racing going into next year, which is such a shame because I think that Parker Retzlaff is a super talented driver. He got a second pole of his Xfinity career and his second pole of 2024. And because of what happened at Daytona, it's very likely he will not have a seat for 2025, which is really unfortunate. And Sam Mayer, who has a ride for next year at the Haas factory team, being teammates with Sheldon Creed next year, I just simply don't understand why Sam Mayer had to be that aggressive that early in the race. I think that was uncalled for from Sam Mayer, and Sam Mayer should definitely be sending a pretty big apology to Parker Retzlaff, as I think it was definitely very uncalled for and very unacceptable, but I'm also not surprised to see Sam Mayer do this because Sam Mayer is someone who was super over-aggressive this weekend, and I think he didn't deserve to make the next round and make the championship 4 because of his over-aggressiveness, and I think it was unacceptable what he did, in my honest opinion. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Matt Mills. Now, if you watched the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series race a couple weekends ago at Homestead Miami Speedway, you saw what happened. Connor Jones basically got very frustrated with Matt Mills going to turn number 3 on lap 70 of the event, and Connor Jones has flat out dumped Matt Mills hard into the outside wall. His truck ends up catching on fire, and Matt Mills is sent to the hospital for a couple days and has a ton of smoke inhalation. Then NASCAR does penalize Connor Jones for 2 laps, and then Connor Jones later in the week gets a suspension. Matt Mills was released from the hospital on Monday, and thank everybody for the support. Now, this past weekend at Martinsville, he was interviewed by the media in regards to what happened, and said he spoke on the Connor Jones crash. He really had not been able to get a really good bird's eye view on what happened after he end up seeing the replays of the wreck. He was also asked about the situation if he had spoken to Connor Jones at the time. He says no, he has not spoken to Connor Jones at the moment. Now, he does reveal that Connor Jones actually did reach out to Matt Mills about what ended up happening, so at least Connor is trying to reach out to try to fix things. But Matt Mills said he has not responded to Connor, and it might be a very long time before he does, in fact, respond to Connor because he wants to wait for the right time to do it, and he said right now, at the moment, is not a right time. I'm glad to see that Matt Mills is okay. That's the most important thing. And he actually had a pretty solid run in Martinsville, I believe getting a top 20 finish, which is really good for him. But in my opinion, Matt Mills did not deserve what Connor Jones did to him. And I'm glad that NASCAR did step in and suspended Connor Jones for a week. Now, Connor Jones is expected to be back this week at Phoenix to drive the 6-6 truck, which I'm really worried about him being behind the wheel because I think a lot of drivers are going to confront him this weekend at the track and it talked to him about what ended up happening, and they're probably not going to be really happy about it. But for me, first thing is that Matt Mills, he has every right to wait as long as possible. Matt Mills should wait for a long time to talk to him because that's the most important thing is Connor Jones has to learn from his mistakes. He can't just do stupid stuff on the racetrack and get away with it. He's done a lot of bad things over the last couple of years, and he's a really bad reputation. From the Cars Late Model Tour to the other stuff he's done in the Truck Series, he's given up on his team throughout the year. He's just done a lot of things that are super, super questionable. And I think Matt Mills needs to step in here and tell him, this is wrong what you did, and you need to learn and pay for your consequences. And I think NASCAR finally stepped in. I think he's going to have a really big rude awakening coming when he does get back to the racetrack this upcoming week in Phoenix, and I think a lot of people are going to be very upset with him, which I think will be very, very justified. So I'm glad to see, first of all, that Matt Mills is okay, but I think, like, again, what Connor Jones did, regardless of the driver, I think it was unacceptable and unforgivable. In my honest opinion, I think it was just stupid and really, really bad and a stupid move on his part. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Dean Thompson versus Tanner Gray. Now, we're all going to talk about the Christian Eckes and Taylor Gray stuff in just a little bit. But an incident that I feel like is kind of getting overshadowed is what happened between Dean Thompson and Tanner Gray in the late stages of the Craftsman Truck Series race. Now, I believe around 35 laps to go in this event, Christian Eckes had the lead. I believe Taylor Gray was moving toward the front. But going into turn number 2 down the back straightaway, Dean Thompson was very unhappy with Tanner Gray, and he just flat out dumped Tanner Gray going into turn number 3. This would unfortunately collectively leave Corey Day, and it also collected Brett Moffitt and took Brett Moffitt out of the race. A lot of people at the time on social media were very frustrated with him, and justifiably so. And after the race had concluded, apparently according to Brett Griffin and a couple other people that were at the racetrack, there's a possibility that there might have been a fight between Tanner Gray and Dean Thompson. Now, why is this also really awkward is the fact that both of them are teammates. Dean Thompson's been a teammate with Tricon Garage for the last couple of years. And then Tanner Gray, of course, is also the grandson of Johnny Gray, who is one of the co-owners of the organization, which I think is very, very awkward from that situation. I think what Dean Thompson did was way worse than what someone like Taylor Gray, Christian Eckes did going into the next story we'll talk about later. I think that Dean Thompson went way overboard and absolutely uncalled for. I guess he didn't see what happened the previous week with Connor Jones where he just flat out wrecked him. Now, obviously, I don't think Dean Thompson is going to get a suspension for that, but just plowing him into turn number 3, it just goes back to the driving standards and the etiquette in NASCAR right now at the moment. The etiquette is just so bad, it's so choppy, and just really uncalled for, in my opinion, to see what was going out there. I just don't understand and get why Dean Thompson did that, especially to a teammate. And he really benefited his other teammate, Taylor Gray, at the end of the day, but I just don't understand why Dean Thompson would do something like this. I think Dean Thompson does have a little bit of talent, but I think you lose some of that talent when he do stupid stuff and stupid crap on the track like this. And it's just uncalled for to do that. You can't be just dumping your teammate in a corner and racing like a jackass on the racetrack. You're not going to gain respect. And I bet you Dean Thompson probably kicked Tanner Gray's ass because Dean Thompson obviously does kickboxing in his free time. But I think what Dean Thompson did was very uncalled for and just unacceptable. I think what he did was ridiculous, and he's got a lot of learning to do as a driver in the sport. But he's really there because of money. Now, it doesn't sound very likely he's going to be back if he's doing stuff like this. I wouldn't be surprised if he's not back at Tricon, because you're not going to do that stuff and get respect from people in the garage. You can't do that kind of stuff because you lose respect from people that race around you. So I really hope he can clean that up going forward into the future as a driver. And now we're going to head jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking a little bit about silly season. So there were a couple very interesting silly season stories that kind of came out this weekend. First, let's begin with Parker Retzlaff. So after Parker Retzlaff won the pole for the NASCAR Xfinity Series race in Martinsville, it was reported by multiple different outlets that Parker Retzlaff does not have a ride currently at the moment for 2025 and is looking for a ride at this moment. Now, Parker Retzlaff, I talked about a little bit ago, he's someone that is looking for a ride at the moment for 2025, as it's very unlikely he is going to be back with Jordan Anderson Racing next year, which is a really, really good shame. Parker Retzlaff is a driver, in my opinion, who has a very big potential to be one of the best drivers in this sport. And if you give him top tier equipment, he is going to be someone that will contend for a championship. I know there was some talk and conversation had Austin Hill moved up to the Cup Series to drive for Colleague Racing that maybe he would have been Austin Hill's replacement because he does bring sponsorship and funding from Funkaway. So my question is, if Parker Retzlaff doesn't go back to Jordan Anderson Racing next year, where does he go? My guess is RSS Racing. RSS looking to make some pretty big moves going into 2025, and he's driven for RSS Racing in the past. So maybe we see Parker Retzlaff go there. That would be my potential guess, but if I was Jordan Anderson, I'm bringing him back next year because I think he's done a superb job with this team at points throughout these last couple years. Continuing on with Chase Purdy, very similar to Parker Retzlaff, Chase Purdy also does not have a ride at this moment for 2024. I have heard some rumors that Chase Purdy is looking around for a ride going into 2025. I hadn't heard a rumor about McAnally Hilgeman Racing about a month or so ago, but I don't know if there's any truth to that at this moment. Chase Purdy does bring a budget with him, but it sounds like the Spire might want to move on from Chase Purdy. There's been some frustration with Chase. He's had some good runs this year from time to time, has won a pole or two so far this year, but generally Chase Purdy's kind of underperformed compared to his teammates Nick Sanchez and, of course, that 7 truck that's shown speed with drivers like Kyle Busch and even other drivers in the field that have ran for that truck this year. They've shown more speed like Connor Zilic as well. So I think Purdy will be looking for a new ride going into next year. I think McAnally could be a decent option. If a Tory wanted to go after him, maybe that could be a possibility too. But I do think Chase Purdy will also be looking for a ride going into next year. Then multiple reporters spoke to Bubba Pollard, and he says he'd like to come and do more NASCAR in the future, but his main focus is running the Snowball Derby. Bubba Pollard had stated earlier this week with getting the opportunity to drive for Sam Hunt Racing, which unfortunately that opportunity kind of came to an end very, very early. Bubba Pollard's really had a good run going, and I think it would be really good to see him get another really great chance and opportunity in a very solid car, or truck for that matter. So I think Bubba Pollard's done a really good job in the first 2 races. It's just a shame to see that it ended not on the best note for Bubba, but I really hope he can find a ride for next year. And then finally, Maya Snyder. Maya Snyder was interviewed by Matt Weaver and I believe Steven Taranto as well. That Maya Snyder says he is looking to have a pretty solid ride going into 2025 and is a lot closer to finding something for the 2025 campaign. Now, Maya Snyder has made 3 starts so far this year and actually got a top 10 this past weekend at Martinsville, which I think is really, really impressive for Maya. I think Maya in a really solid truck or car would be really, really good to see perhaps. It sounds like maybe DGM could be an option for next year, but I also think another team like an Alpha Prime could also be an option. We know Brennan Poole is going back to Alpha Prime, but what about the 43 car? That could certainly be a possibility. What about Jordan Anderson Racing if Parker Retzlaff doesn't come back? That could also be a very interesting move. But I think silly season, for the most part, is going to continue to be very interesting, and I think there's going to be a lot of other crazy moves that are going to happen throughout the rest of this silly season. So we'll see what happens in regards to the rest of the silly season for NASCAR, but I do think there's some pretty big moves coming that are going to change the sport going forward, especially in the lower series as more of those big rights start to get gulped up for the 2025 season. We'll see how things go for the rest of this year. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Kurt Busch. As it was reported earlier today by TMZ, or earlier this weekend by TMZ, that Kurt Busch has officially pled guilty to DWI. Now, DWI, for those who don't know, is driving while under the influence. He has received a 60-day suspended jail sentence and also is supposed to report to community service for 24 hours. And it's a 1-year unsupervised violation, basically 1 year where he is unsupervised probation. If he breaks that, he most likely will go back to jail for something like this. We talked about this back in August, but Kurt Busch had been arrested for driving while under the influence. Now, Kurt Busch does unfortunately have a little bit of history from what people have said when it comes to alcohol. My biggest thing for me is that I hope Kurt gets the help he needs. I know that his career ended on a very bad note, and there have been some talk and conversations about Kurt Busch, along maybe like someone like Carl Edwards perhaps, coming back in racing for 23XI earlier this year. We haven't seen Kurt Busch around the racetrack as much, so, and I think a lot of stuff has been happening behind the scenes, unfortunately, and it's really a shame to see Kurt go down this way. But I am hoping for Kurt's sake that he can get the help he needs. That is the most important thing. He has been a major asset to a team like 23XI. He's helped Bubba Wallace grow as a driver, and he's also helped Tyler Reddick grow as a driver at that team and organization, along with Michael Jordan, who's helped grow that team as well. But I really hope for Kurt's sake that he can get the desperate help he needs, because that is the most important thing. Kurt Busch is a good person, in my opinion. And it's a shame to see people go down this road and have to do things that they're not proud of, but they do things because they have to do it. And I think it's just a shame to see it kind of turn out this way, to be honest. I just really hope that he can get it over with, get it figured out, and get things sorted out. Now, the good news for Kurt is he has been following all the protocols, which I think is the most important thing. And that tells me, at least on the outside, that Kurt Busch is willing to change, which I think is very, very important. If someone is willing to change and get better, that is the most important thing for me, is that if he can figure himself out and keep himself clean for the next year or two, that is a really, really good thing. Again, I'm glad to see that Kurt Busch wants to change his life and get it a little bit better. I know there's been a lot of personal stuff that's happened to Kurt, but I really hope for Kurt's sake that he can get it figured out, because you can't be doing this kind of stuff. You can't be driving while intoxicated. That's really, really bad, and I think that's just a terrible look for him, and I'm really disappointed to see him go like this, because personally, I think it's just bad to see that things happen for him. I thought he was really turning his life around, and unfortunately, things kind of happen, which is really, really disappointing to see. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Christian Eckes and Taylor Gray. Now, if you watch the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series race in Martinsville, we discussed this on the channel. That's the big thing that came out from the Truck Series race. So late in this event, Christian Eckes, let's be real, had the most dominant truck. That 19 truck was on rails and putting up an absolute dominant clink throughout the entire event. But there was a late caution that came out around 40 laps to go, and Taylor Gray came down pit road and got fresh tires. This put Taylor Gray at a tire advantage and was starting to move his way up to the front. Then we get to one of the restarts at around 10 laps to go, and he got a really great run and was trying to get the lead from Christian, but Christian hung on. And then we get to the final restart of this race, and Taylor Gray gets a better restart than Christian Eckes. A little bit questionable if you ask me, but Taylor got the race lead. And then he passed him clean, and it was fair racing. But Christian Eckes had other ideas and completely ran into the back of Taylor Gray, jacked him up going into turn number 3, and moves him up the racetrack and takes the race lead, where Taylor loses a couple positions. Christian would do the same thing to Ben Rose. There was contact, so I thought that was definitely fair racing between those two guys. But quintessentially, Taylor Gray lost the race. Christian ends up holding on and comes off the corner and locks his way into the championship 4 and wins into Phoenix. After the race had concluded, Taylor Gray was seeing red and went up to confront Christian Eckes after the race. He walked up to him. You had NASCAR security, you had reporters following him, and you had him very frustrated and upset. And he confronted Christian Eckes. They both had a conversation. Taylor Gray said, "What the F was that?" Christian said, "It's Martinsville." He then continued on, that being Taylor Gray, said, "You don't ship me into the effing fence. That was uncalled for." And then Christian basically said, "You probably should have done that." And then Taylor said, "Okay, I'll see you next week." And he basically vowed for revenge against Christian Eckes. Now, when I look at the situation between Christian Eckes and Taylor Gray, I think Taylor Gray has every right to be upset. Now, fundamentally, I don't think Christian Eckes fully did everything wrong, as I said. But when you are a guy that's pretty much locked in to the championship 4 on points, and you're not going to lose enough points to get eliminated, you don't need to be doing that kind of stuff, especially if you're in Christian's position. Because Christian was already pretty much guaranteed locked in to the championship 4. You don't need to be doing that kind of stuff. You don't need to be making enemies near the end of this year. Now, Taylor did say he'll probably get fined or get some sort of penalty if he tries to retaliate, which I think is stupid. I think a driver deserves to be able to retaliate. Now, I don't think he's going to flat out dump him in a corner, but they also could delete in the next year, because remember, Taylor Gray and Christian Eckes are both moving up to Xfinity full-time, and I think that could definitely lead two more stuff going into next year as well. They both seem like they have a rivalry now, and I think things could get crazy going forward between these two. In my opinion, I think Christian Eckes was more in the wrong, and making an enemy with the driver going into the final race of the playoffs is just stupid in my opinion. You can't make enemies this late in the year, because now you're going to have enemies and you may not win the championship, which I think it's very likely at this point that Taylor Gray isn't going to win. Taylor Gray is going to make sure that Christian doesn't win, so someone like Corey Ham can win the championship. So you don't want to make enemies late in this year, especially when you're going to Phoenix and you are competing for a championship. So we'll see what happens at Phoenix, but I think there could be some crazy stuff that happens when we do, in fact, end up getting to Phoenix. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Chandler Smith. Now, we'll get to the Chandler Smith and Cole Custer story here in just a short little bit. But before the NASCAR Xfinity Series race has started, Chandler Smith put out a thank you tweet to his fans, basically saying, we're going to fight like hell and fight hard to get the win. And he said, he appreciate everybody for the support. It has been a fun ride. Now, one of the reasons that Chandler Smith put that tweet out is because of the fact that Chandler Smith's future in NASCAR is very uncertain at the moment. They brought this up a couple times on the radio, because it's no secret that Chandler Smith more than likely will not be back with Joe Gibbs Racing in 2025. The reason being is because he is getting replaced most likely by William Sawalch, who's driving number 18 car next year, or Taylor Gray, who will be behind the wheel of the number 54 car. And Chandler Smith does not have a lot as much funding or sponsorship as the drivers who are replacing him going into next year. Now, it's really disappointing to see that Chandler Smith most likely will not be back with Joe Gibbs Racing next year, because I think Chandler Smith has done a really good job this year. While he did not make it to the championship four, he has been one of the most consistent drivers throughout 2024. He has one of the best average finishes. He's got 2 wins so far this year, which right now, by the way, there's only been one driver who's won more than 3 races this year, that being Austin Hill, who's got 4, and there's been only a few other guys that got 3 wins. Aric Almirola's got 3, Shane Van Gisbergen got 3, Sam Mayer, I believe, won 3 races this year, and you've had a couple other guys that have been able to get a couple other victories throughout 2024. But unfortunately, the big issue is funding and sponsorship matter a lot. And if you don't have as much funding and sponsorship, you're not going to be able to find as many rides, which is kind of disappointing to see this someone who has a lot of potential to be really great in the sport. And while I don't think he's going to go out there and win a Cup Series championship, I think Chandler Smith does have a lot of potential to be a really good driver in the sport. He's a guy that just a few years ago we all kind of thought was going to be a future NASCAR Cup Series champion. And while, like I said, I don't think he's going to be someone who could win a Cup Series championship, he is still a very solid and a really, really good driver who has a lot of potential, who's shown a lot of potential. He has ran really good at tracks like Richmond and showed really good speed in Martinsville and was very close to getting it done. But it's a shame to see that it's very likely at this point that he will not be racing next year full time. Now, there's some teams like RSS Racing out there that could pick him up. That would be a good team to go to because they're showing a lot of improvement, and he does bring a little funding. Maybe Kyle C could get out of the way for that. Maybe a team, of course, like JRM gets him part-time, but I really don't know at this point if that is a possibility for next year. So I really hope for Chandler Smith's sake that he can find a ride going into 2025, as I do think he deserves to be back at Joe Gibbs Racing, a really good team. I think he deserves to be racing in NASCAR. It's a shame to see that there's a Toyota debacle at this point, and he's very likely not going to have a ride, which I think is really disappointing. But am I shocked at this point about this? No, I'm not really shocked or surprised, but I really hope, like I said, that Chandler can find a ride. But I do think his future is very uncertain at the moment, and it's very unlikely that Chandler is not going to be racing in NASCAR full-time, which I think is really disappointing, to be perfectly honest. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Cole Custer versus Chandler Smith. Now, if you watched the NASCAR Xfinity Series race yesterday at Martinsville Speedway, you saw the fight, or so-called fight, between Chandler Smith and Cole Custer. Going to the later stages of the race at around 30-40 laps ago, Chandler Smith will get in the back bumper of Cole Custer after racing him very fair but very, very clean. There was a little contact between both of them, and then eventually Chandler Smith moved him up the racetrack and got him up the track. There would be a caution to come out at around 25 laps to go in the race. They would get to the next restart, and chaos would ensue. Sam Mayer running the back bumper of the guys Aric Almirola in front of him, get a ton of damage on the front. But one thing some people didn't notice is that Cole Custer actually gave payback to Chandler Smith, and they both went up the racetrack, and they lost a ton of ground and positions. This would pretty much take both Chandler Smith and Cole Custer out of a chance to win the race. And Chandler Smith was not very happy about it. He basically was calling him a punk for that, calling it a chicken you-know-what move, was really, really frustrated on the radio. After the race had concluded, Cole Custer, of course, advanced his way to the championship four, while Chandler Smith, of course, did not make the championship four. There was a confrontation between both of the individuals. They both started exchanging words. Chandler Smith was the one, of course, who went up to Cole Custer, not the other way around, and Chandler was exchanging a lot of words. Fingers were being pointed, and then about 30 seconds after they started yelling at each other, Chandler Smith threw a little bit of a smack and smacked him in the face. Then Chandler looked at security, backed up to where security was as he was slapping Cole Custer, and then he basically backed up and backed away. Now, after this all had concluded, Cole Custer, of course, then spoke to the media after and basically says he didn't really feel the slap. He said it was kind of soft. He didn't even really feel the slap from Chandler Smith. Then Chandler Smith continued speaking to the media, and he basically called what Cole Custer did a chicken shit move. Was not very happy after Kansas. Now, both of these drivers do have a little bit of history. Like I mentioned a second ago, you go back to Kansas Speedway. They were both battling for the win against Aric Almirola, and they were battling really hard for the lead. There was a little bit of contact between both, and Cole Custer was not very happy. Chandler did say that he did look back at what happened in Kansas, and he did take responsibility for what happened at Kansas, but he was not very happy with getting cheap shotted going into turn number 1. Now, getting to Chandler Smith in that, Chandler Smith obviously, he's going to do what he wants to do to win. He needs to go up there and beat Aric Almirola. He's one of the few guys that can go up there and beat that number 20 car. But overall, I think that Chandler Smith, one, if you're going to try to throw a punch, actually throw a punch. 2, don't back up the security and basically protect you. And 3, don't let the pit crew members get into you. That really wasn't fully a fight, in my opinion. That was more of something like kind of sissy stuff, in my opinion. Because personally, I think that Cole Custer, with how Bill he is and him doing WWE stuff especially, Cole Custer probably could kick Chandler Smith's butt if we're going to be real and honest. I look at the situation here with Cole Custer, and Cole Custer's not someone you really want to mess with. Now, Cole Custer obviously is competing for a championship, and Cole did say that Chandler probably had a little bit of a reason to be upset about what happened. Now, I don't know if we're going to see revenge between both these guys. Chandler doesn't really have a game at this point, especially with his future being uncertain right now at the moment. But Cole Custer is fighting to go back-to-back. And with how fast Cole Custer was, he's probably going to run away from Chandler Smith. But Chandler Smith is also going to be really strong, considering he was super dominant at Phoenix and had one of the best cars there. But I think for Cole Custer and Chandler Smith, I really hope they can get this figured out and sorted out going forward, because I don't want to see what happened in the Truck Series race where Carson Osbar and Heim were wrecking each other. Then we saw all the chaos at the end. I really hope that doesn't end up happening, but I'm very worried along with the truck race as well. We're going to see a lot of chaos between everybody, and it's just going to be one of the worst championship weeks, like the end of the Cup Series race earlier today, which we'll get to hear very, very soon. So nonetheless, it's very interesting for sure, and I think it's crazy to see both these guys continue to confront each other, which I wasn't shocked to see, to be honest with you. Not surprised to see all the chaos at the end of this event. And now we'll go ahead and jump on to the first of 2 major stories in today's episode, as we're talking about Aric Almirola. Now, Aric Almirola is a driver whose future is very uncertain currently at this moment, going into 2025. And after he won his 3rd race of 2024 and went back-to-back at Martinsville in the NASCAR Xfinity Series, he spoke on a couple things. Number 1, he spoke on Chandler Smith. He says he understands what Chandler Smith is going through currently at the moment, because he always said he had 1-year contracts with organizations like Richard Petty Motorsports and Stewart-Haas Racing. He usually said, though, that he would get everything figured out by August and would have everything sorted out, and he did only have one time where he didn't have everything sorted out by October. That was, I think, last year, and then, of course, he got an opportunity to drive for Joe Gibbs Racing. But he was also asked by Matt Weaver, I believe, about his future in NASCAR, and he doesn't really know what he's doing currently at the moment for 2025. But he does say he is not planning to run full-time in NASCAR in 2025 if he does decide to return. A couple months ago, I think about a month or so ago, Dustin Albino did an article in regards to Aric Almirola, and Aric Almirola isn't really sure if he's going to come back next year in 2025 or is going to officially retire at the end of this year. Now, Aric Almirola, in my personal opinion, he probably should go full-time if he wanted to, but his wife told him that that's not going to happen. But if Aric Almirola wanted to ever go and race full-time again in NASCAR competition, I really think he would be a major threat and contender for the championship. I did see a lot of people get mad at Aric Almirola was competing in the event I don't know why people are mad at Almirola for competing. Number one, Aric Almirola is racing for an owner's championship, which is why he's running the final 7 races. The owner's championship is probably more important than the driver's championship at this point for the teams, because that's a lot of money coming in. So that's probably why he's running for the owner's championship. I don't know, just a thought. But Aric Almirola, I would love to see him come back in 2025, at least part-time, with Joe Gibbs Racing, because I think he legit could be a winning contender. But also, he's had history with other drivers, too, like Bubba Wallace got into that shoving match or something like that during a Toyota competition meeting earlier this year. Those two, of course, have a little bit of history, so Bubba probably wouldn't want him to come back at this point. But I think Aric Almirola coming back and racing for Joe Gibbs Racing part-time or driving part-time for another team like JRM perhaps could definitely be really, really interesting. I think there's a really good chance he will at least be back in some sort of capacity next year, but also there's a good chance he could fully retire at the end of this year. It's all going to depend on what Joe Gibbs Racing decides to do. If they do run a 4th car, at least part-time, which it does sound very likely they're going to run a 4th rotation car, an all-star car, he should be considered for that rotation role. Get into the team with drivers like Martin Truex Jr. and, of course, Ryan Truex, who will likely be back with this team next year. Corey Heim will not be part of this team because, of course, Ty Gibbs is taking an ownership role in the Xfinity Series program for next year. But I do believe that Aric Almirola should be part of that group, same with Bubba Wallace as well. I think Almirola would be super, super competitive, and I think he's done a really good job in Xfinity. I think he's had really good pace, really, really great speed, and I think Almirola has done a very excellent job throughout the 2024 season with this organization. He's had a kind of a career resurgence in the Xfinity Series. He's had now 7 career wins coming into this year. He only had 4 victories in Xfinity. Now he's got 7 wins and back-to-back wins at Martinsville, and it's been really cool to see him drive that number 20 car this year. There's only been a few races where he hasn't been competitive, one of those being Watkins Glen, but really in these playoffs, he's been super competitive. Could have won Homestead, won that race at Kansas, has been strong in the playoffs in Xfinity this year, and I think, like I said, if JGR wanted to make the right decision for 2025, it'd be very, very wise for them to bring in the organization part-time and coach the young drivers going in this team, like William Swalch, like Taylor Gray. We know that he's been coaching those drivers, and coach other drivers maybe from other manufacturers like a Connor Zilisch perhaps, or other drivers going into the Toyota camp like maybe Corey Heim, help him out a little bit. I think that would be a really good move on his part to really help the young drivers, because I think he's been a big reason why we've seen Chandler Smith and Sheldon Creed show a lot more potential. He's been there to give them advice, and he's been really helping them throughout this year. And I think if he comes back to the team next year, I think he'll only end up getting better and bringing this organization in a much better position going forward. So we'll see what ends up happening going into 2025 for Aric Almirola, but I think there's also a good chance he will retire. Aric Almirola is only 40, so he still has a few years definitely of potential in his career. He probably will never go back to Cup in the future, which I also wouldn't be surprised or shocked if he never does, but he also could go back part-time. You never know at this point. But again, as for Almirola, I would definitely love to see him come back next year, at least on a part-time basis, but I think there's also a very strong chance and a really great possibility that he's going to altogether retire at the end of the year, which would not shock me or surprise me because I think Almirola can do what he wants to do. I think there's a good chance, though, that this could be the end for Almirola at the end of the year, but also think there's also a chance he could come back to Xfinity. We'll have to wait and see what he ends up officially doing for 2025, but I really would love to see him definitely come back and at least run part-time in the 2025 NASCAR Xfinity Series season. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the final major story of today's episode as we're talking about the end of the NASCAR Cup Series race at Martinsville. Now, I did a little bit of a talk about this during the Cup Series race review, which Ryan Blaney picked up the win. But we're not really talking about Ryan Blaney picking up the win. We're talking about all the race manipulation, all the stupidity that happened at Martinsville. So late in this race, Ryan Blaney had gotten by Chase Elliott and Kyle Larson and had taken the race lead and had moved up to the front. Behind him, you had a playoff battle going on between Christopher Bell and William Byron for the final transfer spot. Christopher Bell had not had a really good day, was struggling throughout the whole entire event, and he, of course, had William Byron, who was starting to fade in the back. But behind him, he had 2 Chevrolets, and we'll get to that here in just a minute. But let's first begin by talking about the wall ride. On the last lap of the race, Christopher Bell was desperately needing to make a pass. Bubba Wallace had potentially a flat tire perhaps, and was starting to slow down very unexpectedly, and was basically the slowest car on the racetrack with a 24.9 second gap, slower than any car on the track. Now, he had been radioing about 5 or 6 laps earlier that he might have had a flat tire, and that is certainly possible, but he was definitely clearly backing up and was definitely willing to fall back quite a bit. Now, Bubba did speak to the media after and did say that he might have had something broke, which is kind of contradicting stories what he had said on the radio. But Christopher Bell, going into turn number 3, while he did not fully wall ride, he still technically wall rode. Now, meanwhile, you had other stuff going on the racetrack. You had radio communication going on between a lot of different parties. Mostly the Chevrolets, but also the 23 team had some radio communication. Let's begin by talking about the radio communication between the 1, the 3, and the number 16. Starting off with the 1 communication. They go on the radio by saying that, hey, do we all remember the deal? Do not pass him. Do you remember the deal? Do not make the pass because Chevrolet will not very happy. The most egregious radio comes from the number 3 car. Austin Dillon is communicating with his team and organization about, do we know the deal? Do we know the deal about making the pass? Do we know the deal? They stay right behind him. They run down William Byron on older tires, but they don't pass him, which is there. And then, of course, you have this BS radio communication. Then his radio transmission comes out around the number 16 car. Of course, early in the race, Ryan Blaney had went up and moved him up, SVG up the track, and then SVG was also told about the Chevrolet stuff. Remember the deal around Chevrolet? And SVG said, yeah, I definitely know about that 10-4. And he was laughing and chuckling on the radio. And then NASCAR would come down with the decision. They would penalize Christopher Bell for the wall ride, but they did not penalize William Byron or Christopher Bell for the radio manipulation and the race manipulation after the race had concluded. To me, with the wall ride, I think that might have been the right call. Yes, it wasn't quote-unquote a full roll ride like Roush had saying. It was definitely not the same thing. But NASCAR says if you wall ride at all regardless, they're going to penalize you. So I think NASCAR might have gotten the call right. Now, Joe Gibbs was trying to basically appeal it, which I think, honestly, it was definitely an appealable act, in my opinion, to go ahead and appeal, because you're not going to penalize for the race manipulation, but you're telling me you're going to penalize for the wall contact. Are you kidding me? You're going to do you're going to do that? You're really going to do that? I think that is really, really bad. And they told him they couldn't appeal, which I think is stupid. NASCAR should have been able to allow them to appeal that. I think they should have been allowed to do that. But then Elton Sawyer spoke to the media, and he basically said they never made a decision on the race manipulation, but they made a decision on the wall ride. So you're telling me, Elton, that it took you 30 minutes, you took your team up there, your official crew, 30 minutes to make a decision on the wall ride. But you didn't have enough time to look at all the radio evidence that was going around between the 1, the 3, the 16, the 23. You're telling me that you didn't have enough evidence to penalize them too? What are we doing here? If you're going to penalize the 20 team, penalize the 24 team. Because it's penalized Chevrolet. Now, Elton Sawyer did say that they're going to look over this week, so there might be penalties coming out. But why is it going to take till Tuesday or Wednesday for you to make a decision? That is something that should have been made on the spot. You've got the radio communication, Elton. It's clear as day right there. Make the decision there. Come on, dude. And then you had Elton Sawyer defending the playoff format, saying, oh, the playoffs give all this stupid stuff, really, really great stuff going on. Meanwhile, you had a lot of drivers after the race like Brad Keselowski complaining about the playoffs, which is where I'm going to kind of go on a little bit of a rant here. A lot of this race manipulation, a lot of the stupid stuff that happens on the racetrack, a lot of that would not end up happening if the playoff format did not exist the way it does. The playoff format creates a lot of this BS and a lot of stupidity that we see on the racetrack every single time. And to me, it is really, really embarrassing how the sport has become. Officiating this year has been a joke. Elton, you have had to come out so many times to the media about so many stupid things. From stuff that happened in North Wilkesboro with the fight and all this stuff between Kyle Busch and Ricky Stenhouse Jr. to other stuff on the racetrack, how the Brickyard 400 ended, that debacle, from other stuff that's happened this year, from the way Darlington kind of ended or something like that perhaps, to the way other races have ended. And then you're not speaking to media in certain instances, in certain factors. The playoff format is a joke. The playoff format causes all these problems. You've got drivers like Kyle Larson and Christopher Bell. Now, Bell did get a penalty for that, but Bell and Larson, and maybe Elliott too, should be in the Final Four. You have 4 deserving drivers that aren't in the Final Four. Kyle Larson had a 6-win year in 2024. And you're telling me he's not in the championship 4, who's been one of the more better drivers this year, gotten the most points? You're telling me he's not in the Final Four? Meanwhile, Joey Logano's in the Final Four, who has 3 wins, right? But he's got 12 top 10s all year and 7 top 5s. You're telling me he's in the Final Four. You're telling me Ryan Blaney, who's been better this year than last year, but has still not been that great, he's in the Final Four. The system is a joke. There has to be changes. That is the biggest thing that would fix a lot of this race manipulation BS that happens. You get rid of the playoff format. Now, I do expect the NASCAR is going to do something about this. They're probably going to hand out penalties in some sort of capacity to all the parties involved, penalize Chevrolet perhaps, make them mad, make Toyota mad, all the people mad, and the fans are just tired of it. The fans are fed up. The fans are sick of it. They're tired of it, all this BS that goes on, and it's just annoying for us fans that love this sport. I care about the sport because I love this sport. I've been a fan of the sport for nearly 20 years at this point, since 2007. And yet, every single time that we see that all this stuff happen, this happens, where all the BS happens, all the stupidity happens. It seems like it's every week. We just had one of the most all-time greatest races at Homestead Miami Speedway last week. One of the best races, I think, of all time. And we now go a week later, and we have this. This is one of the darkest days NASCAR's had in a long time, I gotta say. It's up there definitely with Richmond from earlier this year, and Richmond in 2013. Things have got to change. It's got to stop. Drivers should not have to be frustrated and upset about stupidity like this all the damn time. It's annoying, I'm sick of it, and it's just embarrassing for the sport, and things need to change going forward. I hope it changes. Get rid of this system, because the system is so embarrassing for the sport, in my opinion. So, that is going to today's long NASCAR news and motorsports news episode. I want to thank you guys for watching. Please subscribe to the channel, notifications on, so if I win a video, it does go live on my channel. Follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and support me on Patreon as well. Let's description below that, and comment your thoughts below on today's episode. What are your thoughts about all the stuff that happened this past weekend in Martinsville, and of course, Aric Almirola? Let me know it in the comments below. Later this morning on the channel, see NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series Championship predictions. Tomorrow, we're going to see Xfinity Championship predictions, along with, of course, the race picks for trucks. Wednesday, NASCAR news video. We'll have Cup Championship predictions, and we also will have the Xfinity Series race picks for this upcoming week at Phoenix. Thursday, Cup race picks for Phoenix, along with, of course, the paint scheme video. If there's any major news that breaks throughout the next couple days, which is going to be live with the lawsuit with 2311, all that stuff going on, we'll discuss it here live on the channel. So anyways, like I said, I want to thank you guys for watching today's episode, and I'll see you guys next time for more great, awesome NASCAR content and other motorsports content on the channel like this. Take care, everybody.